You are narrating your own grocery shopping. Not because anyone asked. Not because you enjoy providing a running commentary on the relative merits of organic versus conventional bananas. You are narrating because the baby in the cart screams the instant you stop. Every sentence buys 2 seconds of silence. Every pause, a breath, a swallow, a moment to check the list, triggers a wail so immediate and so predictable that you have started timing it. 2 seconds. That is the gap between the end of your voice and the beginning of the alarm. You have started narrating everything. The drive home, the walk to the mailbox, your own breathing, and the thought that keeps threading through the exhaustion is the one nobody says aloud. Am I creating a child who cannot handle silence? The answer from polyvagal neuroscience is direct and absolute. You are not creating dependency. The superior temporal sulcus has been processing the acoustic properties of your voice, not the words, the prosody, and feeding them directly to the vagus nerve. Your voice has been functioning as a real-time autonomic regulation device. When you stopped talking, you did not stop entertaining. You disconnected the pacemaker. Adults self-regulate in silence without effort. The mature vagal system adjusts heart rate, breathing, and stress hormones autonomously. No external input required. You sit in a quiet room and your autonomic nervous system maintains homeostasis with zero assistance. This is not a universal human capability. It is a developmental achievement that took decades to install. The infant vagal system cannot do this. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory identifies the ventral vagal complex as the social engagement system, connecting the muscles of the middle ear, which tune preferentially to human voice frequencies, to the vagus nerve, which regulates cardiac rhythm, respiratory rate, and gut motility. In infants, this system operates in what Porges terms co-regulatory mode. It requires continuous external input from a trusted caregiver's vocal prosody to maintain the physiological state of safety. The baby is not in co-regulation by preference. The hardware for autonomous regulation has not been installed. The parent's voice is not optional comfort. It is autonomic infrastructure. Your voice is not entertainment. It is a pacemaker. The infant's autonomic nervous system functions like a patient in the ICU, whose cardiac rhythm is being maintained by an external device. As long as the device is connected, as long as you are talking, the system runs. Heart rate stable, breathing regular, cortisol contained. The moment you disconnect the device, the moment you fall silent, the system has no internal backup generator. It does not gradually degrade. It alarms immediately. The cry is no different from the monitor beeping when a pacemaker lead comes loose. It is not drama. It is a machine reporting that its power source has been interrupted. 4 neural mechanisms produce this dependency. The first is the superior temporal sulcus and its role in prosodic processing. The STS does not primarily process words in infants. It extracts the melodic contour of speech, the rhythmic cadence, the tonal fluctuation, and the emotional valence embedded in vocal patterns. This prosodic information is routed directly to autonomic regulation centers in the brainstem before any linguistic content is decoded. The baby is not listening to what you say. The baby's brainstem is metabolizing how you sound. The difference is critical. A parent who speaks in flat, emotionless monotone provides less regulatory input than a parent who speaks in the naturally exaggerated prosodic contour of infant-directed speech. The sing-song pattern that every culture on Earth independently developed because it is the acoustic frequency that the infant vagal system most efficiently processes. The second mechanism is the polyvagal co-regulation circuit. The ventral vagal complex connects 3 systems. The middle ear muscles tune to human voice frequencies, filtering them from background noise. The vagus nerve converts the prosodic signal into autonomic commands, slowing heart rate, deepening breathing, suppressing cortisol, and the caregiver's facial muscles provide visual reinforcement. When all channels are active, the system maintains parasympathetic tone. Remove the voice entirely, and the system loses its primary input. The third mechanism is the cortisol voice contingency, one of the most counterintuitive findings in developmental neuroscience. Studies using still face paradigm variations measured salivary cortisol in infants during conditions where the caregiver remained physically present and visually available, but stopped speaking. Cortisol levels began rising within 60 seconds of silence, even though the caregiver was right there, smiling, making eye contact. The voice absence was processed as a distinct physiological stressor independent of the person's absence. The baby's stress system does not respond to whether you are present. It responds to whether you are speaking. The fourth mechanism is the auditory brainstem response and its frequency tuning. The infant auditory system is preferentially calibrated to the frequency range of the human speaking voice, with particular sensitivity to the fundamental frequency of motherese, typically between 200 and 500 Hz. This frequency range is processed at the brainstem level with speed and priority that exceeds all other auditory inputs. The voice is neurologically classified as a survival critical signal, processed faster than any other sound in the infant's environment. Here is the finding that catches most parents off guard. The still face paradigm showed that a caregiver who is physically present, visually engaged, and emotionally available but silent produces a measurable cortisol increase in the infant within 1 minute. The visual presence is reassuring. It modulates the stress response, but it is not regulating. The prosodic signal specifically is what the vagal system uses to maintain parasympathetic tone. This means that a parent who puts the baby in a quiet room with full visual access to the caregiver, but no speech, may observe distress that seems disproportionate to the situation. The baby can see you. The baby knows you are there. But the autonomic regulatory system is not receiving its primary input, and without it, the ventral vagal circuit begins losing parasympathetic tone. Heart rate drifts upward. Breathing becomes shallow. Cortisol begins its measured rise. The emotional distress the baby displays is not frustration at not being entertained. It is the physiological consequence of the autonomic regulation system losing its external input. The line that requires nuance, a baby who cries when the caregiver stops talking in a calm environment, is demonstrating typical co-regulatory dependency. The ventral vagal system operating in its expected mode. A baby who shows no visible distress at extended caregiver silence across all contexts, who does not orient to the caregiver's voice, does not track prosodic changes, and does not seek vocal re-engagement, this pattern may warrant evaluation, not because silence tolerance is always concerning, but because absent orientation to voice across all contexts is a data point that specialists can assess with greater precision. The science empowers differentiation without weaponizing diagnosis. In utero, the fetus was continuously regulated by maternal physiology. The heartbeat provided rhythm. The blood chemistry maintained oxygen levels. The placental connection delivered a continuous stream of biochemical regulation that kept the developing organism in homeostatic balance without any effort from the fetus itself. At birth, that connection was severed. The umbilical cord was cut. But the autonomic system that had been externally regulated for 9 months did not suddenly develop the capacity for autonomous operation. It needed a replacement signal. The voice replaced the umbilical cord. The prosodic rhythm replaced the cardiac rhythm. The tonal fluctuation replaced the biochemical fluctuation. The continuous vocal signal from the caregiver became the post-birth regulatory connection, functionally analogous to the placental connection, operating through acoustic rather than chemical channels but serving the same biological purpose. Keeping the immature autonomic system in a regulated state, while the internal regulatory hardware undergoes its long construction process. The baby who cries when you stop talking is a baby whose nervous system has correctly identified your voice as the continuation of a life support connection that began before birth. What exhausted parents call neediness, polyvagal theory calls the most biologically rational dependency in infant development. The vagal system did not develop the capacity for autonomic regulation overnight. It was designed to transition gradually from external co-regulation to internal self-regulation over the course of the first 2 years. And during that transition, the caregiver's voice is not a luxury. It is the bridge between the placental regulation that ended at birth and the autonomous regulation that will arrive when the ventral vagal circuit completes its maturation. You are not the entertainment. You are the bridge. The parent was never the entertainer. They were the external regulation system. Every word spoken to a baby who screamed at silence was not spoiling. It was keeping the autonomic nervous system within its operating parameters. The heart rate that stayed stable during the narration was not a coincidence. It was a direct physiological consequence of the vagal circuit receiving its prosodic input and converting it into parasympathetic commands. The transition from silence intolerance to peaceful silence tolerance happens when the ventral vagal circuit develops sufficient internal capacity for autonomous regulation. That capacity builds on a biological timeline. No training protocol accelerates it. No graduated silence exposure installs the hardware faster. The system matures when the system matures, driven by myelination, synaptic pruning, and the gradual strengthening of internal regulatory pathways that operate on genetic timetables, not parenting schedules. Comment below. How long is the silence your baby tolerates before the alarm activates? 2 seconds? 5? 1 breath? Because behind every precisely timed wail was a nervous system measuring the gap between the last pacemaker signal and the next one. And the precision of that timing, the absolute reliability of the 2-second delay, tells you exactly how closely the system is monitoring its regulatory input. That baby is not demanding your attention. That baby is counting the milliseconds since the last heartbeat of a pacemaker it cannot live without yet. Go back to the grocery store, the cart, the narration, the exhaustion. Now, see what was actually happening inside the baby every time a sentence ended. The superior temporal sulcus processed the prosodic contour of each phrase and fed the rhythmic data to the vagal nucleus in the brainstem. The vagus nerve converted the prosodic rhythm into cardiac commands. Maintain this heart rate. Keep this breathing depth. Hold this cortisol level. Each sentence was a pacemaker pulse. Each word was a beat in a regulatory rhythm that the baby's autonomic system was tracking with the precision of a cardiac monitor. When the sentence ended and the 2-second gap opened, the vagal system registered the absence of the prosodic signal. The brainstem did not interpret this as a pause. It interpreted it as signal loss. And because the ventral vagal circuit in co-regulatory mode has no internal oscillator capable of maintaining the rhythm independently, the system defaulted to the only backup it has: the sympathetic nervous system. Heart rate began to climb. Cortisol release initiated. Breathing accelerated. The alarm engaged. The parent who narrated the grocery shopping was not performing an act of spoiling. They were performing a neurobiological function with the precision of a medical device. Voice in. Parasympathetic tone maintained. System running normally. Voice out. Sympathetic activation. System alarm. Cry onset. The parent did not learn this through a textbook. They learned it through the most brutal empirical research method available. Thousands of iterations of silence, then scream, then speak, then quiet, until the pattern was encoded in the parent's own nervous system as automatic. Keep talking. If someone you know is exhausted from being a human soundtrack for a baby who will not tolerate a single second of silence, send them this. Because they are not spoiling their baby. They are running the most important piece of medical equipment in the house, and that equipment is their voice. Every word they speak, every narrated banana comparison, every described traffic light is a pacemaker pulse keeping the most important patient in their life autonomically stable. They are not an entertainer. They are infrastructure. There is a day coming when the pacemaker will no longer be needed. One afternoon, without planning it, the parent will stop talking, not deliberately, Just a natural pause, a moment of distraction, a lapse in the narration, and the silence will hold. 3 seconds, 5, 10. The baby will continue playing. The cry will not come. The parent will notice the silence before the baby does, and for one startled moment they will hold their breath, waiting for the alarm that does not arrive. That will be the moment the internal pacemaker came online. The ventral vagal circuit completed its transition from co-regulatory mode to autonomous operation. The baby's own nervous system developed sufficient internal regulatory capacity to maintain parasympathetic tone without continuous external vocal input. The heart rate that used to require your voice to stay stable is now maintained by an internal oscillator. The cortisol that used to spike at 2 seconds of silence is now managed by an endogenous regulation system. The bridge has been crossed. The autonomic system is running on its own power, and the parent may feel something unexpected underneath the relief. Not disappointment exactly. Something quieter. A small pang at the realization that a dependency has ended. The exhausting demand of being someone's external nervous system, of having your voice be literally necessary for another human's physiological stability, carries a weight that only becomes visible when it lifts. The parent who narrated grocery shopping and traffic patterns while the baby screamed at every pause was not performing a meaningless task. They were keeping a heart rate stable. They were containing a cortisol response. They were maintaining the parasympathetic tone of the most important autonomic system in their life, using nothing but the acoustic properties of their voice. Every word was a pacemaker pulse. Every sentence was a regulatory cycle. Every narrated grocery list was an act of neurobiological precision, performed by a person who did not know they were doing it, but did it anyway, thousands of times, because the alternative was a scream that their own nervous system could not tolerate either. The parent's vagal system was co-regulating too, responding to the baby's distress with its own stress cascade, calming when the baby calmed, alarming when the baby alarmed. Two nervous systems running on the same circuit, synchronized by the same voice, regulated by the same prosodic rhythm. You were not their entertainer. You were their external nervous system. And the day the internal one came online, that connection transformed. Not into something lesser, but into something different. The voice that once maintained the heart rate now maintains the relationship. The baby who once needed your words to breathe now needs them to understand the world. The pacemaker function ended. The voice remains.